If you're over 60 and you've ever walked into a room and forgotten why you went in there, or you've stood at the grocery store trying to remember what was on your list, I want you to stay with me for the next few minutes because what I'm about to share may explain more than you think. This isn't about memory tricks or brain games. It's about something much more basic and much more overlooked happening inside your blood vessels right now. Here's something most people never hear from their doctor, at least not in plain language. Your brain is one of the most demanding organs in your entire body. It only makes up about 2% of your body weight, but it uses roughly 20% of the blood your heart pumps every single day. That means your brain depends more on healthy circulation than almost any other part of you. And here's the part that surprises people. The foods that support your arteries are, in many cases, the very same foods that support your brain. They're not two separate conversations. They're the same conversation. So today I want to walk you through 5 foods that researchers keep coming back to when they study brain health and artery health in people over 60. I'm not going to give you a list you skim through and forget. I want you to actually understand why each one matters, what's happening inside your body when you eat it, and how to fit it into a normal week without turning your kitchen upside down. And I'll tell you now, the food at the very end of this list is the one I think gets the least attention, and it might be the most important one to reconsider. Now, before we get into the list, let's talk for a moment about why this becomes more relevant after 60. When you were younger, your blood vessels were more flexible. Think of a young artery like a fresh garden hose. It's flexible, it expands and relaxes easily as water pressure changes, and it moves fluid efficiently. Over the years, that same hose can become a little stiffer. It doesn't flex quite as easily. That stiffness has a name in medicine, arterial stiffness, but you don't need to remember the term. Just remember the idea. Stiffer vessels make the heart work harder, and they can make it more difficult for blood to move smoothly to places like your brain. At the same time, something else can happen inside the walls of your arteries. Over decades, certain particles in the blood, along with cholesterol, calcium, and other substances, can build up along the inner walls of blood vessels. This buildup is often called plaque. Think of it like mineral buildup inside an old pipe. At first, it doesn't block much, but over years, if it keeps accumulating, it can narrow the space where blood needs to flow. When that happens in the vessels feeding your heart, we usually talk about heart health. But when it happens in the smaller vessels feeding your brain, it can affect thinking, focus, and memory over time. This is why doctors and researchers increasingly talk about brain health and heart health as connected, not separate. One well-known observation in medical research is that what's good for your heart tends to be good for your brain too. That's not a coincidence. It's because they share the same delivery system, your blood vessels. Now, I want to be very clear about something before we go further, because I don't want you to walk away from this video feeling afraid. Aging does not automatically mean poor health. It does not mean your brain is doomed to decline, and it does not mean your arteries are destined to clog. What it does mean is that your body benefits from a little more support than it did in your 30s or 40s. And the encouraging part, the part one really want you to hold on to, is that food is one of the most practical, accessible tools you have for giving your body that support. You don't need a complicated regimen. You need consistency with the right choices most of the time. So let's start the list. I'm going to count down from 5 because I want you to stay with me for the most important one. Number 5 on this list is leafy green vegetables. I'm talking about spinach, kale, collard greens, and Swiss chard. Now, I know what you might be thinking. You've heard eat your greens since you were a child, and it might sound almost too simple to matter here. But let me explain what's actually happening when you eat these vegetables regularly, because the reason may surprise you. Leafy greens are rich in a nutrient called nitrate. Here's what that means in plain terms. When you eat nitrate-rich vegetables, your body can convert that nitrate into a compound called nitric oxide. Nitric oxide has a very specific job. It helps the inner lining of your blood vessels relax. Remember that inner lining I mentioned a moment ago, the smooth surface inside the pipe? That lining is called the endothelium, and it plays a major role in how easily blood moves through your vessels. When the endothelium functions well, blood vessels can widen slightly when needed, allowing blood and the oxygen it carries to move more freely. Some researchers believe this may be part of why diets rich in leafy greens are associated with healthier blood pressure patterns and, in some studies, with slower rates of cognitive decline in older adults. Leafy greens are also rich in vitamin K, folate, and lutein, a plant compound that has been studied specifically for its relationship to brain tissue. Lutein isn't just found in your eyes, where most people have heard of it. It's also found in brain tissue, and some research has associated higher lutein levels with better performance on certain cognitive tests in older adults. Again, I want to be careful with my language here. This doesn't mean spinach will make you smarter. It means there's a reasonable research-supported case for including these vegetables regularly as part of a pattern that supports brain and vascular health over time. Here's the practical takeaway. You don't need to eat massive salads every day. A realistic goal might be including a serving of leafy greens most days of the week, even in small amounts. You could add a handful of spinach to eggs in the morning. You could saute kale with a little olive oil and garlic as a side dish. You could add greens to a soup you're already making. The mistake I see most often is treating leafy greens like an all-or-nothing commitment, buying a giant bag, using it once, and then watching it go bad in the refrigerator. Instead, buy smaller amounts more often, and look for easy ways to fold them into meals you already enjoy. Number 4 is fatty fish, particularly salmon, sardines, mackerel, and trout. Now this one tends to get more attention, but I still find that people misunderstand why it matters. Fatty fish contains a type of fat called omega-3 fatty acids, specifically 2 forms known as EPA and DHA. Let me explain what these actually do, because omega-3 has become such a common phrase that its meaning sometimes gets lost. DHA in particular is a major structural component of brain cell membranes. Think of a brain cell almost like a tiny container, and the membrane is the wall of that container. DHA helps make that wall flexible and functional, which affects how well signals move between brain cells. Some researchers describe DHA as being especially important for communication between neurons, the cells responsible for thought, memory, and coordination. On the artery side, omega-3 fatty acids have been studied for their relationship to triglyceride levels, which are a type of fat found in your blood. Some research suggests that regular intake of omega-3 rich fish may be associated with modestly healthier triglyceride levels and may support a healthier inflammatory response in blood vessels. Inflammation, in simple terms, is your body's natural response to irritation or injury. A small amount of inflammation is normal and even helpful, like when you sprain an ankle and it swells to protect the area. But when inflammation becomes ongoing and low-grade throughout the body, some researchers believe it may contribute to the kind of vessel changes we talked about earlier, including plaque buildup. Now, here's a mistake I want you to avoid because I see it constantly. People hear fish is good for you, so they go out and buy fried fish sandwiches or heavily breaded fish fillets, thinking they're making a healthy choice. Unfortunately, the frying process and heavy breading can add significant amounts of unhealthy fat and sodium, which may offset some of the benefits you're trying to gain. The goal isn't just fish. It's fish prepared in a way that preserves its natural benefits, baked, grilled, or pan-seared with a modest amount of olive oil. A realistic weekly goal that many nutrition guidelines point to is 2 servings of fatty fish per week. That might sound specific, but think of it in practical terms. That could be salmon on a Tuesday and canned sardines on toast on a Friday. If fresh fish feels expensive or intimidating to cook, canned salmon or sardines are perfectly reasonable options, and they're often more budget-friendly. I've had patients over the years tell me they assumed canned fish didn't count the same way. It absolutely does, and it's often more convenient for someone managing a busy week or living alone and not wanting to cook a large fillet just for one person. Number 3 on the list is berries, specifically blueberries, strawberries, and blackberries. This one has become something of a favorite in brain health research over the past 2 decades, and I want to explain why, because the mechanism is genuinely interesting. Berries are rich in compounds called flavonoids, specifically a subgroup called anthocyanins, which are responsible for their deep blue, red, and purple colors. Here's a simple way to think about it. Those vibrant colors aren't just for appearance. They're a signal of a dense concentration of plant compounds that have antioxidant properties. Let me explain what antioxidant actually means in practical terms, because it gets thrown around so often that the meaning becomes vague. Inside your body, normal metabolic processes create byproducts called free radicals. Think of free radicals like small sparks given off during a chemical reaction. In small amounts, they're a normal part of life, But when free radical activity becomes excessive relative to your body's ability to neutralize it, it can contribute to a kind of wear and tear on cells, including cells in blood vessel walls and in the brain. This process is sometimes called oxidative stress. Antioxidants act like a kind of buffer, helping to neutralize some of that free radical activity before it causes cumulative damage. Berries are among the most concentrated dietary sources of these antioxidant compounds. In fact, one well-known long-term study following older adults found that those who ate more berries appeared to experience a slower rate of cognitive decline over time compared to those who ate fewer berries. I want to be precise here. This kind of research shows an association, a pattern researchers observed, not definitive proof that berries alone cause slower decline. But when you combine it with what we know about their effect on blood vessel function, including some evidence that anthocyanins may support healthy blood pressure and improve blood flow, it becomes a food worth taking seriously. Here's a comparison that might help this stick. Think of oxidative stress like slow rust forming on metal that's exposed to the elements over years. You can't stop all of it, that's simply part of how the world works, but you can slow it down significantly by adding a protective coating. Berries function a bit like that protective coating for your cells, day after day, meal after meal. The practical side of this one is refreshingly simple. A realistic goal is around 1 cup of mixed berries several times a week. Frozen berries work just as well nutritionally as fresh, and often for a lower cost, so don't feel like you need to buy expensive fresh berries out of season. You can add them to oatmeal, yogurt, a smoothie, or simply eat a small bowl as a snack in the afternoon. The mistake to avoid here is relying on berry-flavored products like berry yogurt with added sugar or fruit snacks or juice and assuming you're getting the same benefit. Many of these products contain little actual berry content and significant added sugar, which can work against the very benefits you're trying to gain. Number 2 on the list is walnuts, and more broadly, nuts in general, though walnuts have received particular attention in research. Let me explain why walnuts specifically tend to come up so often in brain and artery studies. Walnuts are unusual among nuts because of their fat composition. They contain a notably high amount of a specific omega-3 fatty acid called alpha-linolenic acid, sometimes abbreviated ALA. Your body can convert a portion of ALA into the same DHA and EPA compounds found in fatty fish, though the conversion is limited, so walnuts shouldn't be considered a full replacement for fish. Still, researchers have found that regular walnut consumption is associated with several markers of vascular health, including modest improvements in cholesterol patterns and blood vessel function in some studies. There's also an interesting structural detail worth mentioning, purely as a memorable observation rather than a scientific claim. Many people notice that a walnut, when you look at it closely, resembles the general folded shape of a brain. That's simply a curiosity, not a scientific reason to eat them, but I mention it because sometimes an odd little detail like that is what helps people remember to actually reach for a handful instead of a bag of chips. Beyond the fat content, walnuts contain polyphenols, another category of plant compounds with antioxidant activity, along with magnesium, a mineral that plays a role in regulating blood pressure and healthy blood vessel tone. Magnesium deficiency has been associated in some research with higher blood pressure and increased vascular stiffness, so getting adequate magnesium through foods like walnuts, along with other sources like leafy greens, may play a supporting role here as well. Now, here's where I want to give you an important practical clarification, because this is where I see people make mistakes most often. Nuts are calorie dense. A quarter cup of walnuts contains a meaningful number of calories, and if you're eating them in addition to your normal meals, rather than in place of less beneficial snacks, the calories can add up quickly. The goal isn't to eat unlimited amounts. Thinking more is always better. A reasonable, commonly referenced amount is about a small handful, roughly 1 ounce, most days of the week. Think of it as swapping your afternoon cracker snack for a small handful of walnuts, rather than adding walnuts on top of everything else you're already eating. Another mistake worth mentioning is buying heavily salted, honey-roasted, or candy-coated walnuts, thinking they still count the same. The added sugar and sodium in many packaged nut products can significantly change the nutritional profile. Plain or lightly roasted walnuts without added coatings are going to give you the benefit you're actually looking for. And now, here we are, number 1. This is the food I mentioned at the beginning. The one I think gets the least attention relative to how important it actually is. Number one is extra virgin olive oil. I want to explain why I placed this at the top of the list because on the surface it might seem like a strange choice compared to something like fish or berries. But when you look closely at the research connecting diet to brain and artery health in older adults, particularly research coming out of Mediterranean population studies over the past several decades, olive oil consistently appears as one of the most consistently associated foods with both healthier vascular aging and better preserved cognitive function. Here's what's happening. Extra virgin olive oil is rich in monounsaturated fats, which behave differently in the body than the saturated fats found in foods like butter or fatty red meat. Monounsaturated fats have been associated with healthier cholesterol patterns, specifically supporting what's often called HDL, sometimes referred to as the helpful cholesterol type, because it appears to assist in transporting excess cholesterol away from artery walls and back to the liver for processing. But the fat content is really only part of the story. Extra virgin olive oil, especially high-quality, minimally processed varieties, contains polyphenols in concentrations not typically found in more refined oils. One specific polyphenol found in olive oil, called oleocanthal, has actually been studied for anti-inflammatory properties. Some researchers have described its activity as functionally similar, in a very mild and dietary way, to certain anti-inflammatory compounds. Though I want to be clear, this is not a medication and shouldn't be thought of as a substitute for anything your doctor has prescribed. There's a well-known long-term research project called the PREDIMED study, conducted in Spain, which followed older adults at higher cardiovascular risk. Participants who followed a Mediterranean-style eating pattern supplemented with extra virgin olive oil showed a lower rate of major cardiovascular events compared to those following a lower fat diet. Later analyses of similar populations also found associations between higher olive oil intake and better preserved cognitive test scores over time. Again, I want to be precise. This is strong, well-regarded research, but it reflects an eating pattern, not olive oil in isolation, working as a miracle substance. Olive oil appears to be one meaningful piece of a broader dietary pattern that includes vegetables, fish, nuts, and legumes, many of the very foods we've already discussed today. Here's the comparison that I think makes this easiest to understand. If your artery walls are like the inner surface of a pipe, think of olive oil used consistently over the fat sources you might otherwise be reaching for as choosing a smoother material for that pipe instead of one prone to build up in friction. It's not an instant transformation. It's a long-term difference that adds up meal after meal, year after year. Now, the practical application here matters enormously because this is where I see the most common mistake of all. People hear olive oil is healthy, so they buy a large bottle, use it occasionally, and think that checks the box. But the research associated with these benefits generally reflects olive oil as a primary fat source used regularly, not as an occasional garnish. A more meaningful goal is replacing other fats you're regularly using, butter for cooking, vegetable oil for sautéing, creamy dressings for salads, with extra virgin olive oil as your default choice. Used consistently across the week, a simple, realistic way to build this habit is to use olive oil as your everyday cooking oil for sautéing vegetables, drizzle it over cooked vegetables or salads instead of heavier dressings, and use it in place of butter on foods like bread or roasted potatoes when that fits your taste. Look for bottles labeled extra virgin, which indicates a less processed product that retains more of those beneficial polyphenols, and try to store it away from direct light and heat, which can degrade its quality over time. So now you have all five. Leafy greens supporting healthy blood vessel relaxation and providing brain supportive nutrients like lutein. Fatty fish delivering omega-3 fats that support brain cell structure and healthy inflammation responses. Berries offering a concentrated source of antioxidants that may help protect cells from cumulative wear over time. Walnuts contributing plant-based omega-3s, magnesium, and polyphenols in a convenient portable form. And extra virgin olive oil, tying much of it together as a foundational fat source associated in long-term research with some of the strongest outcomes for both vascular and cognitive aging. Now, I want to step back for a moment because if I just gave you 5 foods and said goodbye, I wouldn't be doing my job. The truth is, no single food on this list is going to transform your health by itself. I know that might sound like it takes some of the excitement out of the list, but I'd rather be honest with you than sell you something that isn't real. What actually matters, based on decades of research into aging populations around the world, is the overall pattern. It's what you eat most days over months and years that shapes how your arteries and your brain age. This brings me to the one idea I really want you to remember from this entire video. More than any single food, the biggest mistake isn't eating an unhealthy meal every once in a while. Nobody achieves perfect eating, and frankly, nobody needs to. The biggest mistake is repeating the same limited pattern year after year without ever making small adjustments and then being surprised later when your body reflects those decades of habits. Consistency, not perfection, is what actually shapes long-term outcomes. That's true for blood pressure, it's true for cholesterol, and it appears to be true for cognitive aging as well. I also want to address something directly because I think it matters. If you're listening to this and thinking, well, I'm already 70, I'm already 75, is it too late for any of this to matter? I want to gently push back on that thought. Research into vascular health and cognitive aging consistently shows that positive dietary changes can have measurable associations with health markers at nearly any stage of life. Your body doesn't stop responding to better inputs just because you've had a few decades of less than ideal ones. It's never really about starting over. It's about starting from wherever you are right now today with the next meal in front of you. Let's talk practically about how this actually fits into a normal week, because I don't want you leaving this video with a list in your head and no real plan. Here's a simple way to think about it. You don't need to change everything at once. Pick one meal a day where you can naturally include one of these 5 foods. Maybe that's spinach in your morning eggs. Maybe it's switching your afternoon snack from crackers to a small handful of walnuts. Maybe it's committing to cooking salmon once this week instead of your usual choice. Small, realistic substitutions repeated consistently are what create meaningful change over months and years. That's genuinely more powerful than an ambitious plan you abandon after 10 days. I also want to mention a common mistake I see across nearly all 5 of these foods. One that applies broadly rather than to just one item in the list. People often assume that if a small amount is good, a large amount or a supplement version must be even better. But food-based nutrients tend to come packaged with fiber, water content, and a complex mixture of compounds that work together in ways isolated supplements often don't replicate. If you're considering supplements, particularly fish oil or other concentrated extracts, that's a conversation worth having directly with your doctor, especially if you're taking blood thinners or managing other medical conditions, since some supplements can interact with medications in ways that matter for your safety. Food first, as your foundation, is generally the safer, more well-supported starting point. I want to say something else because I think it's important for you to hear directly. None of what I've shared today is meant to diagnose anything you may be experiencing, and it isn't a replacement for the relationship you have with your own doctor. If you have specific concerns about memory changes, blood pressure, cholesterol, or any diagnosed condition, please bring those concerns to a healthcare professional who knows your full medical history. What I've shared today is meant to give you a clearer, simpler understanding of how everyday food choices relate to 2 of the most important systems in your body, so that conversation with your doctor can be even more informed and productive. As we wrap up, I want you to remember one thing above everything else we've covered today. You still have meaningful influence over how your brain and your arteries age at 60, at 70, at 80, and beyond. This isn't about achieving some perfect diet or overhauling your entire kitchen overnight. It's about small, realistic, repeatable choices made consistently, meal after meal, week after week. That's genuinely how lasting change happens for your heart, for your blood vessels, and for your brain. If there's one small action I'd encourage you to take today, it's this. Look at what you already have on hand and see if there's one place, just one, where you could naturally include one of these 5 foods this week. That's it. That's the whole assignment. Not a complete transformation, just one small doable step. If this conversation gave you a clearer understanding of something you've wondered about for a while, I'd genuinely love to hear from you in the comments. Tell me which of these 5 foods you already eat regularly, or which ones surprised you the most. If you know someone, a friend, a spouse, a sibling, who might benefit from hearing this, consider sharing it with them. And if you'd like more conversations like this one, ones focused specifically on practical, honest health information for adults over 55, I'd be glad to have you join us here for future videos. Take care of yourself this week, be patient with the process, and remember, it really is the small, consistent choices that carry the most weight over time. I'll see you in the next one.